Hi, I'm Angus Cress Gillespie, your host for Old Ways in New Jersey, here on East Brunswick Television. I'm here today in the studio with Nick Burlakoff of Ossining, New York, who's a well-respected folklorist. After completing his graduate work in folklore at Indiana University, Nick published numerous scholarly articles on a wide variety of topics. For more than 25 years, he's worked in the field of applied folklore, serving as museum director, community organizer, and consultant to nonprofit organizations. Currently, he's taken on the role of principal field worker to develop the theme for the 2011 edition of the New Jersey Folk Festival, scheduled for Saturday, April 30th. Founded in 1975, the festival is a research-based presentation of contemporary living cultural traditions with 4 stages of live music. Over the years, the festival has brought many musicians and artists, performers and craftspeople, workers and cooks, storytellers and others to New Brunswick to demonstrate the skills and knowledge that embody the vitality of community-based traditions. Normally, the festival features a particular nationality group. Over the years, the festival has featured tradition bearers from many nations and dozens of New Jersey ethnic communities. This year's festival features the folk culture of Kalmykia, but since most of us have never even heard of such a place, we thought it would be a good idea to bring Nick Burlakoff to our studio to tell us about it. Nick, who are the Kalmyks anyway?
The Kalmyks are Mongolian people. They come from, originally, they come from western China today, called an area called Jungaria. It lies between Mongolia, outer Mongolia, the country of Mongolia, and Tibet. So they're on the northern border of Tibet. North of them is Mongolia on one side, Russia on the other side. So this is where the Kalmyks come from, and they came in a 17th century to Russia.
Okay, so currently they're a Russian group then?
Yes, they're different kind of Oirats, or Western Mongolians. One of the things that people very often misunderstand is they think all Mongolians are the same. There are actually 2 major groups, the Khalkha Mongols, Genghis Khan and his people, and then the Oirats. And there are a whole number of group of Oirats, and the Kalmyks are really the ones who settled in Russia in the 17th century and actually had a semi-independent, or even some will say independent country within the Russian state until the 18th century.
And since so many of us haven't heard of them even, how many are there?
There are really not that many. It's a relatively small group. I would say probably worldwide there's probably no more than 200,000, 250,000 Kalmyks. Wow. So most of them are still in Russia, in the Russian Federation today. There are some remnant of Kalmyks who are in China. They're the ones who re-emigrated from Russia, who initially came from Jungaria and then went back. And they're still known as Kalmyks, as opposed to the other people who are known as Oirats, keep their original name, yes.
In the Kalmyk language, what does Kalmyk mean?
There's actually one of the kind of fun kind of things is like there is no letter F in Finland. In Finnish. So the Finns call themselves the Suomis. So the Kalmyks also never use the term Kalmyk. It's actually pronounced Halmag or Halmig, depending how you pronounce it. But it's a Turkic word, an Arabic word, and they were named that by the Turks, and then the Russians took that turn over, and it was never used as a self-reference until this generation, really, the generation after, let's say, 1940, 1950.
They embraced it.
They embraced it. Before that, they used it because Kalmykia is really a consolidated group of various clans, and they would use the clan affiliation like Buzava or Torgut or Dorbut as self-identification.
And I noticed it's spelled in different ways at different times.
That is the wonderfulness of transcription. It's since it's not a particularly widely known or accepted language, even though there's an international standard for how to transliterate Kalmyk language into various languages. Pretty much it's catchers catch can, and everybody has their own system. Well, it's kind of Shakespearean spelling, if you want to use it in English analogy.
Well, I notice in contemporary news accounts even, when you're transliterating from Arabic into English, there's several different ways to go.
And there are quite a few more Arabs than Kalmyks.
Yeah. Well, and we've been speaking, just taking for granted, there's such a thing as the Kalmyk language. It's not Russian at all. It's different from Russian.
Yes, it's very different. It's totally incomprehensible to a Russian. There are some words that among the more Russified Kalmyks have entered the Kalmyk language. I don't know of Russians adopting any Kalmyk words that I'm familiar with, but basically they're very distinct languages.
Is there any danger of the Kalmyk language dying out?
In fact, it's not only is there danger, it's been declared an endangered language by UNESCO, and it's a tragic story in a real sense, because number one, you don't have a large population base to start off with, and second of all, between 1943 and 1957, the Kalmyk nation was disbanded, and the people were exiled all over the Soviet Union. So for those years, there was total loss of community. They were just put in various agriculture areas and stuff like that. So for that period, and then after in 1957, when they were re-granted, if you want to say, in a sort of semi-independent status within the old Soviet Union, there was a great disincentive and even prejudice towards teaching and learning Kalmyk, even though it wasn't prohibited, but the emphasis was on Russian, so language suffered, and even though 97 or 95, something like that, % of Kalmyks claim they know Kalmyk, studies have shown that competence in a language is probably below 50%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, to bring it closer to home, when and how did the Kalmyks come to New Jersey?
Well, that's a wonderful story again, because the Kalmyks, many of them supported the whites during the Russian Revolution against the communists. So a whole group of them emigrated with defeated Russian forces, first to Turkey and then Yugoslavia, some to Bulgaria, some to France. And then during World War II, another group of Kalmyks left Kalmykia because of their dissatisfaction with once the Soviets were winning again, and they kind of retreated behind the Germans. So there was a group of about, let's say, roughly 1,000 Kalmyks left after World War II in refugee camps in Bavaria, predominantly 2 refugee camps. They tried to leave, but unlike other refugees at that time, or displaced persons, who would leave as individuals, the Kalmyks tried to leave somewhere as a group. And because of the prejudice against Asians, because
of the Asian Exclusion Act.
Right. They were refused virtually by every country until, with some smart lawyering by the Quakers, the Brethren in Pennsylvania, and also the Tolstoy Foundation, their lawyers argued, and the Attorney General of the United States ruled that because of their spent over 300 years in Russia and quote unquote became Russian, they in essence were Europeans at this point and not Asians anymore. And so they allowed all the Kalmyks to come in.
With the stroke of a pen.
With a stroke of a pen. And so the Kalmyks came in as a group between October 1951, and this is what we're doing this year, celebrating the 60th anniversary of their arriving at these shores, in 1952. So in that period of time, over 500 people arrived to these shores.
That story almost illustrates the folly of trying to categorize people by race.
Oh yeah, it's saying it's not.
Yeah. So overall, today, how many Kalmyks do you find in the U.S. In general, in New Jersey in particular?
That's a tough. The preponderance of all the Kalmyks in the United States are found in the New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia area. I'd say probably 97% of all Kalmyks, although there's a small group now that's assembling in California. But the lowest number I've heard is about 1,000, and the highest number I've heard is 3,000.
So it's still pretty tiny.
It's tiny. I would say a good number, probably a safe number, is probably around 2,000 of Kalmyks, and that includes the people who emigrated in '51 and their descendants, plus after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there is a new immigration of Kalmyks who the local Kalmyks tend to call the Russians because of their heavier influence by the Russian culture.
Of course.
Yes.
Well, Nick, what motivated you to study these people?
Well, actually, this was I was studying because I've been studying Buddhism and practicing Buddhism for a number of years, and I've been taking this 3-year course, and we had to do a final paper. And I thought, okay, I speak Russian, I know Russian, so nobody ever heard of Buddhism in Russia. So I decided, why don't I do my final paper on Buddhism in Russia? That led me to the whole idea, or to the knowledge and appreciation of the Kalmyks. And I knew that there were Kalmyks in the Freehold area from my previous work. And so I thought, why don't I check and look into it and kind of look into that. So I went down, thanks to the internet, found a holiday to go to the Hurul, or place of assembly or temple, and went down there, and that's how this started. Then I called you, and we went down for basically New Year's Eve, Kalmyk New Year's Eve, and the board of New Jersey Folk Festival decided to honor the Kalmyks because they're true blue and wonderful people, and so that's how this all came about. So the past year I've been deeply engrossed in Kalmykia.
So it must have taken a little nerve to insert yourself into the Kalmyk temple where we didn't know anybody.
Well, as a folklorist, you're just used to that kind of stuff, you know, and part of it is I've had the good fortune working with ethnic communities most of my working life. As a consequence, it wasn't really nerve. The thing that I was really interested in, besides the Buddhism question, trying to figure out exactly what kind of Buddhism the Kalmyks had, I was also interested to see how Russian the Kalmyks were, because, I mean, they're a distinct nationality with a very different culture and language and everything. And so that's one of the reasons I was very, very kind of eager, and definitely wasn't afraid. Or
I've seen in some of your writing you called them Mongol Tibetan Buddhists, which really seems like an odd combination.
It is, and I think it's a little controversial. I know that Jonathan Cutler, who is heading the Tibetan Learning Center, took issue when I mentioned them, that they're Mongol-Tibetan, because dogmatically they're very close to Tibet. Not close, they're identical with Tibetan Buddhist practice. But in terms of their beliefs and what folklorists call folk religion, there are differences. For example, the Kalmyks have the deity, the master of the universe, which the Tibetans don't have, that comes from the pre-shamanistic belief system of the Kalmyks and the Oirats. So, and there is also a different veneration of different guardian gods. For example, a very important one is Pandan Lama. The Tibetans also have them, but Pandan Lama plays a more significant role in the Kalmykian and Mongolian practice of Buddhism than she does in the Tibetan practice of Buddhism.
So they're like cousins.
They're like cousins, and it's, you know, all those distinctions are always a bit artificial in some ways, but it helps you to understand some of the cultural specificity of each people a little better, a little clearer, and that's the only reason you make those distinctions.
One of the things that's puzzled me in our work down there in Monmouth County is we're already talking about a pretty tiny community, and yet there's 4 different worship centers. How do you explain it? I mean, wouldn't it make more sense for them to get together under one roof?
In a way, it would, and I think, you know, the community itself kind of wonders how it all happened. But part of the problem is, if you remember a little earlier, I mentioned the fact that this is a composite group, the Kalmyks, that they're very clan-oriented and family-oriented. An extended family is really the core of Kalmyk culture. And the clan, as by extension as an extended family, is also the core. So one of the things that happened when the Kalmyks came here, the Buzova clan or group was the dominant one in the United States, even though they're a minority back in a home country. And the Astrakhan groupings or clans became a minority. They felt that they're losing their culture. So the first temple that was organized, or Hurul, was kind of a conglomerate. Everybody kind of worked together. Then the Buzova got a little stronger, made a little bit more money, got a little, you know, more settled in this country, and they said, we got to have a real Buzova kind of temple to celebrate, you know, our ethnicity. So they built another temple.
The monks, they come from Tibet, not from Russia.
Yes, well, this is one of the very interesting, you know, if you're a sociologist or in a religious study, this is an incredibly interesting situation because there were no seminaries during the Soviet period, in Tibetan seminaries,
of
okay?
Course.
So where are they going to get
the real thing?
The real thing. So they had to go to Tibet. As it happened, Tibet, the Dalai Lama went into exile because of the Chinese communist situation. So they had a surfeit of monks. So they're only too happy to send them to the United States. And very often a young monk is sent to the United States. He spends some time and he learns, let's say, the American way, and then he goes back to India and then becomes an instructor in a monastery there. Some, though, have become really beloved spiritual, if you want to say, guide
or authority figures.
Authorities figures in this country. Of course, the one thing, though, that the Kalmyks very early on told me, says, it takes us a while until we train them to do it the Kalmyk way.
That's good.
So there's one wonderful monk, Tenzing, who is just this wonderful, half Kalmyk, half Tibetan, even though he's Tibetan, born Tibetan. Yeah.
Well, as I putting this thing together, I see they're ethnically Mongol, they're Buddhist worshiping, but now they've been in America for, what, 50, 60 years. Is it fair to say they're now Americanized?
I think very much so.
And how's that shown?
Well, the easiest way, again, we're looking from public. Obviously, you know, one of the biggest holidays, as an example of the Kalmyk calendar, is 4th of July picnic.
Okay, that's cool.
Memorial Day is another major picnic.
That's very cool. Yeah.
So it's that kind of, and obviously, you know, already in 1960s, one of the Kalmyks fell in Vietnam. You know, they went just like everybody else. In fact, they had a particularly heavy burden because when they came, this was right at the Korean War. And as one of the old people who, first generation immigrants, said to me, you know, down here in the south of Jersey, we had a little bit of a redneck problem you know, during the Korean War, so it wasn't easy the first number of years. Of course, now with this wonderful, in the 60s, you know, the Asian Exclusion Act fell by the wayside, and now there's a very large number of Asians in New Jersey. So in some ways, the Kalmyks lost their uniqueness.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I see that. Well, Nick, the folk festival in New Brunswick is going to be featuring the Kalmyks, as they always feature a different group every year. The visitor to the folk festival who's trying to learn something, of course, the festival's more than just buying jewelry and eating funnel cake. Hopefully it's educational too. What should the visitor look for?
Well, actually, I think it's going to be pretty exciting. I mean, I'm still hoping that you'll find me a Bactrian camel, the two-humped camel. That's really the mark of Kalmykia. But aside from that, I think one of the exciting things is that the national dance troupe from Kalmykia is sending a delegation of dancers and performers that will be here at the folk festival. There's going to be a recitation, which I think is for the first time at folk festival, and first time for me, will be the epic song Jangar, which will be, you know, really a wonderful contribution to the culture.
Is it kind of like opera?
No, it's an epic song. It's like Homer's Iliad,
Or
but the
Beowulf.
Kalmyk version, or Beowulf. Yeah. So that's a very rare because there are very few cultures that maintained their epic tradition. The Mongolian nationalities have, and it still plays a very important role in their culture.
We have Longfellow. We wrote Hiawatha and Evangeline, but it's sort of fallen by the wayside.
It has, and in fact, one of my Cajun friends, one time we had a meeting up there, and he said he came back smiling, and after a minute, I said, Barry, how come you were so happy today? He says, I had a chance to dance on Longfellow's grave. He never forgave him Evangeline.
Well, there might be gers or yurts.
The gers are the traditional Kalmyk dwelling, which is a portable felt and wood structure, or also known by the Turkic word as yurt by non-Mongols. And in fact, they're hoping to build a little village, and that should be part of the visual impact. Besides the national dance troupe, and also local. I mean, this is a folk festival. So we have some Jangar singers, we have children's dancers and singers, and craftspeople, including embroiderers. And one of the things that hopefully will be demonstrated, I don't know if we'll have a chance to sample it, but demonstrated is making of Kalmyk tea and bortsak and things like that.
Oh. Well, you mentioned Kalmyk tea. What's it like?
It's a delicacy. Actually, I have a taste for it. There must be some Kalmyk gene in me someplace because it is a wonderful concoction of black tea boiled together with milk and butter and salt. And it's a very important, at this point it has become almost like a ritual drink at all holidays, and there's a particular way to offer it and to accept it, and there's a definite sequence of people who you offer it, and it's very, very interesting, but I enjoy just the taste of it. And on the internet, I just found in Kalmykia, they're selling instant Kalmyk tea in a bag.
I'll be darned. Well, you said it's tea with butter and salt. It occurs to me like that's ideal for people living in a very cold climate.
Well, in the summer it's very hot because it's the steppe region. It's an arid region. Okay. And in the winter it is very continental. It's a highly continental, so it is cold. They're nomads initially.
They were
originally
sheep herders?
There were sheep herders. There were renowned horsemen. The horse is probably the central animal in Kalmyk culture. But basically, all you had to meet is dairy product to eat. dairy products and meat, some herbs, and then later as the influences of the Russians and other people came about, then you brought in more grains and vegetables and stuff like that. So it's a very meat and dairy rich diet, traditional diet.
Nick, for our viewers, where might they find more information if this program has piqued their curiosity?
The New Jersey Folk Festival has a website that I'm sure are gonna hopefully put on the screen, and there is a series of short articles that have been written for this year's as educational, including listings both of books, a bibliography, and listing of other websites that are available, worldwide. I mean, for somebody who likes manageable information but very complex stories, the study or the just getting to know the Kalmyks is a wonderful thing to do.
So you've been working on this for some time. What are your plans for all this material that you've accumulated?
Well, I'm hoping to get at least an article, and I'm really hoping to work that into a book because it's an important culture, not only for its own right of the Kalmyk. I think the story of the Kalmyk is not known, and it's people who have suffered a lot, and their story needs to be out just for people to understand. But right now they're playing a critical role in the evolution and development of Russian culture also. And that's something that I don't see a lot of either sociological or political analysts really talking about, that right now, since 1991, Russia is going through a transformation that is probably the third largest transformation in its history. And the Kalmyks and other nationality minority groups are playing an incredibly critical role in that transformation.
Would it be fair to say that Kalmykia is to Russia as New Jersey is to the United States? Does that work?
I would say in some ways even more critical, okay? Because historically the Kalmyks protected the flank. There would be no Russian state if that southern flank was not protected in those early years as the state was expanding and going eastward. So in that sense, it's probably more important than New Jersey. But that's a good analogy on the whole, though.
Is this tie in with the whole idea of the Kalmyks becoming Cossacks?
Yes. Well, again, we're getting into some complexity here, but initially, the Kalmyks, as I said, had an independent state, and the deal was the Russians pretty much left them alone as long as the Kalmyks fought and robbed and did what was necessary towards the
on the frontier.
Arab and the frontiers, and left the Russians alone, okay, and the Russian settlements alone. Then, after the dissolution of the Khanate, of the Kalmyk Khanate, then they were given an opportunity, and it was an opportunity, to become Cossacks, because they got special land deals, they got special supplies from the government, special subsidies from the government in return for military service. So they were not part of the Russian regular army, but they were troops that were semi-independent, very well compensated for, by the standards of their time. And since the Kalmyks were already, warfare was one way of getting goods into the community, this was a natural extension of it.
Well, Nick, this has really been fascinating. So few of us have ever even heard of the Kalmyks, and to find that there's a large, vibrant community right in Howell in Monmouth County is kind of amazing. So I'd like to thank you for coming out today.
You're quite welcome.